Dear students, welcome to my classroom of research methodology in history. Today, I would like to enlighten you about a theme which is very sensitive and human and also controversial, debatable and academic. I'm talking about violence. Violence and contemporary thoughts. This is my theme for today's lecture. What is violence? Is it possible to define violence? What do you feel can be a proper definition of violence? Have you ever faced violence? Have you ever seen someone to be the victim of violence? Have you ever been violent? These are the questions which are coming into my mind when I am thinking about this particular topic. Can we historicize violence? Can we theorize violence? Can we consider violence as a method, as a formula? Can violence be political, or it's something which is purely emotional? Or can violence be intentional? Can violence be a form of culture? Can violence be a form of a society? So we need to understand how we are defining violence. What are the various facets of understanding violence, and how we can pursue researches on violence to have a better idea on human emotions. Violence is a form of human emotions. It is something which is related to our psyche. It is something which is a very much part of our behavioral existence. Or we can define violence with the help of behavioral science or behavioral anthropology. We can define violence scientifically as well if we do a psychoanalysis of violence, or who are violents, why we do become violent. There are many reasons. The psychosocial reasons definitely are important. Apart from that, sometimes we create violence, we made violence, we provoked violence. So if I start with history of violence, I may give you one example of an article which is written by Philip Dewar and Joy Damoussi. The title of the article is Theorizing Histories of Violence. You will get information about this article in my PPT and academic script. But what is my argument here? That violence is also a topic for academic discussions. It should not be something which is tabooed or stigmatized. When we discuss violence, that means we are not forgetting the principles of non-violence or ahimsa or peace. We have to accept that violence is a part of our society, is a part of our history. That's why history is sometimes not pleasant, because in history we find the stories of wars and bloodshed, and how these wars and bloodshed changed the fate of the society and civilizations. That is also noticeable. If I give you one example of a war or a revolt or a revolution which was violent and that changed the course of the history. I'm talking about the French Revolution of 1789. that revolution was full of violence. Many people died, many had sacrificed their lives, many were got into guillotine just to be beheaded, and all these are examples of sheer violence. But what French Revolution taught us? French Revolution taught us the three principles: liberty, equality, and fraternity. All these changed the dynamics of history that time, especially how these principles influenced the construction of nationalism all over the world, and how it started to have struggles against colonialization or against colonial supremacy. And this is something which is not that much pleasant, because the history of French Revolution is violent, as it talked the rejection of the society which was dominated by the authorities, and these authorities, they were the representatives of a kind of monarchical government. But definitely that rejection made people to be more democratic, and also with the help of the philosophers, they started thinking something which was the beginning of the ideas related to socialism, or how to achieve the rights of the people, or of the all, or of the mass. French Revolution taught us about the rights and privileges of the mass or mob, and how we can preserve the same. This is one example of how we can appreciate violence in history, and which was needed, because that blow to the Bourbon dynasty was very much fatal, and that definitely ended up their tyranny and torture and exploitation through the ages which they were having over the people. This is one example of how we are situating violence in European history and what lessons we are getting from it. But it does not mean that I am supporting violence. But I cannot ignore violence, because it's a part of human emotions. As I have already mentioned, it's a part of our socio-cultural, political, economic existence. It's a part of our identity. Now I can give you one example from the history of India. If I give you the example of how Gandhi saw violence and how he got influenced by violence, so that he adopted a unique method of resisting the colonial authorities, and that method was the counter of violence, that is being known to us as ahimsa or non-violence. Here I must say the martyrs who sacrificed their lives for our country, they followed militant nationalism. That was violent. It was like they wanted to take revenge from the British authorities. they celebrated violence, and also they made the presence of violence political or politically acceptable, as they were very much influenced with the ideals of Gita, the book which is very much appreciated in the Hindu religion. What is the essence of Gita? Gita teaches us to be indifferent so that we would be able to cope up with any kind of situation. To save ourselves, to protect our religion. That religion is the religion of the humans. We have to be violent if it is required. When one of the characters of the epic Mahabharata, Arjun, was very much disappointed and depressed because he killed many of his relatives in the battle of Kurukshetra. He killed many of the Kauravas. They were his brothers. Then he got valuable advice from Krishna, who was the driver of his chariot. Krishna told Arjuna that if you would like to maintain the Raj Dharma or the religion of the king which he has to maintain to give his subjects a better life, that means perhaps Krishna was talking about how to maintain politics, how to preserve the political existence of the king acceptable, then if he kills someone, that is also justified. And here we find the martyrs who sacrificed their lives for our country and also who killed the British officials. They used to think that to preserve or to maintain or to glorify their religion of humans or their religion of serving others and to break the chain of colonial domination and to make the motherland free, if they are killing people, that is also justified. So this is something, a historical presentation of violence, or how we can situate violence in history, where all the time we are not supposed to highlight the negativities of violence. Violence can be termed as a form of protest. Even in the religions, sometimes we have seen the deities as the protagonists, or they might be portraying something which is violent for others. If I talk on the Shakta religion, then the Kali, who is the symbol of power or Shakti, her presence is also very much disturbing or violent. But she is a protagonist. Her presence perhaps is glorifying the presence of womanhood in the society, and how she was presenting herself in such a bold manner that is also questioning the authenticity or the domination of the patriarchal society. So here also we can have a religious connotation of violence. That how the mother goddess is exhibiting her personality, and that is not that much soothing or calming, rather it's violent. So, violence as a concept, what I feel, is a part of various academic discourses. We can categorize or classify violence, and there we can have political violence, socio-cultural violence, economic violence, or violence as a concept which is related to our human emotions. But in that last segment, definitely we can have a combination of the other three aspects of violence. If I talk about domestic violence should not be treated from any particular gender angle. Women, they can be the victims of domestic violence, along with men and the other marginalized people in the society, like the members of the LGBTQA community or the disabled people. They can be the targets for domestic violence. Unfortunately, we are not in a position in our country to define domestic violence. In Indian Penal Code, there is no clear indication of domestic violence. That means how we can define domestic violence and what are the parameters, these provisions are not clearly mentioned. Domestic violence can be verbal, can be physical. Even rape, which is a form of violence, can be included in the periphery of domestic violence if we talk on marital rape. So, there are various facets of violence that we need to discuss, need to be aware of. When we torture the aged people, when we torture the disabled, when we torture or abuse the children, all are parts of violence with different meanings. Here we find the abnormal, here we find the abnormalities of human psyche in various ways. Their perversions, frustrations, depression, anxiety and all. So this is something as when we are contouring violence from the psychosocial aspects. Here we can mention about the writings of Freud, that how he tried to define madness, which is also a form of violence, or insanity can be very much violent if we are unable to control the same. But insanity is something which is not always being justified with the clinical parameters. Insanity is invisible as well, like how we can make people mad or crazy about certain things, and how we provoke them to be violent. That is known as cultural or religious or communal violence. We are very much aware of the examples of communal violence. In fact, communal violence was one of the reasons for the partition of India in 1947. Many people, they lost their lives irrespective of their religious identity. Women were extremely tortured, raped, killed by the abusers. So, not only the women, also the children and the aged people. So it was a mess, and it was something which can be compared with the genocides which we had during the time of the Nazis in Germany. So, violence here, especially if we take India as our case study, on the eve of independence, having a religious or cultural connotation. As I have mentioned about communal violence, which is cultural or religious, even political, and also I talked on domestic violence. That is something which can be defined from any angle. Domestic violence sometimes is related to the economic status of the abuser. Like when the man in the family who is the sole bread earner is unable to feed all the members of his family, that is making him frustrated with his situation, and that kind of frustration gives him a kind of temptation towards intoxicants, and after being engrossed in this kind of temptation, if the man who is drunk, he hits his wife and children, that is definitely a form of domestic violence. But here we are not in a position to blame that person solely, because his situation, which is very much responsible for his act, here state is also having a role. Thomas Munro, he once stated that scientists are doing various researches to understand violence, and that is also a part of the next segment of my lecture, as how we can situate violence in contemporary thoughts. Now my question is, how we can define contemporary thoughts? Here I must say that when we are looking back to the events which happened in the past and trying to reassess or re-estimate or re-evaluate those events, that is something can be termed as contemporary thoughts. Looking back to the events and trying to judge them in the present situation, which is also helping you to know where you are. If I want to situate communal violence in contemporary thoughts, then I must mention the writings by Sadat Hossein Manto. How Manto, in his writings, he described communal violence. That is very much inspirational for others to situate communal violence in present times, so that we can be able to find out some solutions for avoiding communal violence. Because Manto's writings are very much crude, which told us about the harsh realities of the society. If we want to know how people, they became violent and started attacking each other during the time of the Great Bengal Famine of 1943, which is also known in the vernacular as Ponchasher Monnantar, then we need to read the novel Nobanno by Bijon Bhattacharya. Nobanno is a festival which is exactly like the same that what we have in the other parts of India as Lori or Pongal, when we are celebrating the new harvest. But in this novel Nobanno, Bhattacharya showed like how famine affected the rural people and they had to come to the city Calcutta or Kolkata in search of food. And how the street dogs and humans are sharing food from the same dustbin. Even the humans are trying to snatch the food, that means, the wastage from the mouth of the animals. That means here the dogs. Don't you think it's very much violent and painful? Yes, it is. But this is also being created by the humans only. Their greed, their desire, and their expectations. And also the cards of capitalism, I must say, which has created the differences in the society and which made people very much prone to class exploitation, resulted ultimately in class struggle. And I would like to end my lecture with the theorization of violence in Marxian approach. Like what Marx wanted to say. He talked about class struggle, that means the struggle between the rich and the poor. And that class struggle is the result of class exploitation, because the rich, they exploit the poor. And how he categorized the rich and the poor in the society, that means the have and the have-nots, as he had given them to status, or if I would like to say in a simple manner, two names, the bourgeoisie and the proletariats. How the bourgeois, they exploit the proletariats for their own profit. That is also very much violent. And Marx dreamed that one day all of us will achieve equal rights in the society, and that phase would be termed as scientific socialism, where the proletariats would be in a position to control everything in the society. And all these changes which we are expecting according to the Marxian theory are definitely violent, because we are talking for revolts or revolutions. Revolutions are always violent, but they are needed. That's why we need to reassess violence. It's not like we are promoting or propagating violence, but sometimes raising your voice and be a part of a revolution is not improper or incorrect if it is very much related to your existence and when you are trying to support a better cause in the society. I hope that you have liked my lecture on violence and the contemporary thoughts, so that we can sensitize ourselves to understand the right and wrong in terms of violence, where we should not promote communal violence, but we definitely pay respect to the martyrs who sacrificed their lives so that we could achieve independence, and who were the extremists in the field of Indian politics, and that extremism was saying something in favor of violence. Thank you.